Greetings and salutations, guys. I'm here with my review of The Mandalorian and Grogu, the first Star Wars movie in 7 years. Also, of course, a continuation of the Mandalorian TV series, and a movie that I went into with some pretty notable trepidation. I'm happy to say overall, though, I was very entertained by this movie. If you are a Star Wars fan, I think you will enjoy this movie because it does a good job of immersing you back in the Star Wars universe and having a fun Star Wars adventure. If that sounds like a guarded recommendation, it's not really meant to be, though it's worth noting that this movie is very what you see is what you get. What the trailers were promoting is what the movie is. This is a new adventure with the Mandalorian and Grogu, and it is a well done new adventure with them, but there isn't a lot of new stuff to be found here. It is characters that most of us really like already, put into new situations that are both fun and entertaining, but are also inconsequential to any larger story, both to the Mandalorian TV series, but also Star Wars in general. And I do think that's one place where this movie exists in kind of a strange little pocket of its own. But it's not really a criticism of the movie. I have to talk about it, about Star Wars at large, and having this be the first movie in 7 years, and I will. But if you're just watching this movie, you're just sitting in a theater watching this movie, you'll probably have a good time because I know I had a good time watching space battles, watching blaster battles, watching the Mandalorian get into big fights with characters and be suitably rough and tumble and show that he is a really badass fighter in some sequences here. And I watched a lot of this movie with a big smile on my face. And yet at the same time, I also thought, is there going to be something more? Is there going to be something extra here to sort of grab me? And there wasn't. And so I mostly think that's fine. But at the same time, because Star Wars is in a strange place, just perception wise, I'm also a little surprised that this movie is what it is and that there isn't a little bit more to it. The film's storyline involves the Mandalorian being sent on a mission to hunt down a Hutt. It is for a greater purpose. They're actually trying to get an Imperial warlord as they're trying to hunt down all of the Imperial warlords who have scattered and are trying to rebuild the Empire. But finding this Hutt is a means to an end. So off the Mandalorian and Grogu go and to see if he can lead them to their actual prey. And that's the story. That's the one thing about the trailers for this movie is I kept thinking that there's something more, right? They're holding back something bigger, or what is the actual hook of this movie except that Mando takes a new assignment. And there's not, that's what the movie is. It is a Mando mission. And so on one hand, it can't help but feel like an expanded episode of The Mandalorian. Now here's the thing. I really like The Mandalorian as a series. Yeah, season 3 wasn't as good. It had some bigger issues. But overall, I think the show has been great. I think this show has had a really cool vibe of its own and been a cool corner of Star Wars to explore. I've really enjoyed The Mandalorian as a character, and Grogu, he just freaking works as he does in this movie. So I think, seeing more of it, I'm all for. But because it's a movie, I think there are some expectations here that it's going to go into bigger places, and that's not what they're doing here. I mean, this is like X-Files Fight the Future. If people don't remember or were too young to remember, when the first X-Files movie came out, it came out in between seasons of the TV show, and it's an entertaining movie. And it's cool to see Mulder and Scully in that movie, and it has some spectacle and some great moments between the characters, but it also just continues on to their next story in the next season. Now, we don't know for sure if that's happening here with Mandalorian. There's been no definitive word on whether we're even going to get Mandalorian season 4 now, or if they'll just keep these characters in the movies. But yeah, it's sort of, you just have to accept this movie on its own terms. If you do, it's a good time. Very quickly I thought, oh, this is working. The feel of this is working. Look, Jon Favreau, who only directed one episode of the series, despite having this big executive producer behind the scenes role on it, is a really good director. And, he directed Iron Man, which I think is still one of the best MCU movies, but, it was the very first one, and there's a reason it really set the template. And I think he does a really solid job here. The movie is written by Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, and Noah Clore, and they do a really good job here with the fight scenes of harkening back to the earliest days of The Mandalorian, which is to say the Mandalorian himself, he fights really brutal. And he really does get to unleash here in some ways that are sometimes surprising. He uses his flamethrower, I think, more than he ever has before. Yeah, sometimes it helps that he's fighting creatures, of course, versus humans. But even when he's fighting humans, he doesn't always play fair. He definitely always, goes for the kill shot when he needs to. And it's pretty impressive. I mean, again, it ain't Andor, but on a Star Wars adventure level, it quite literally packs a punch, and there are some really well done action beats here. I really appreciate that, like with Rogue One and Solo, if it's not part of the Skywalker saga, they don't feel like they have to stick to the strict visual template of Star Wars and they can mix it up more. So you get some things here like some point of view shots, both from characters or a droid at one point that you wouldn't normally get in a Star Wars movie. You get a great looking sequence in the rain, some fun cityscapes, I think, in this movie. Even in a series that's had Coruscant, I think that this has to mix it up and have its own vibe of this city where the Mandalorian goes on this mission. Pedro Pascal, per usual, is the voice of the Mandalorian. He is in this movie briefly unmasked, as he is once a season or so on the show, with Brendan Wayne and Lateef Crowder mostly playing the character in his costume when he's on screen with that helmet on most of the time. And him and Grogu are a great pairing. Grogu, look, I mean, is he overtly a super, super cute character that you can feel cynical about from afar and think, oh, well, he's just here to sell merchandise? Of course you can. But guess what? He's really freaking cute. Every time I try to maybe be a little cynical about Grogu, and I do have some misgivings about Grogu, maybe that's a topic for another video at some point, whenever I think, oh, I don't know about Grogu, then I actually see him in action and I'm reminded there is something about this character design and the way that they make this character work on screen. It elicits the awes and the big reactions it's going for. There are moments in this movie that I was very charmed by Grogu. And I could tell everyone around me in the audience was. They also pair him up here more with the Babu Fricks. I know they're actually what, the Enzellans, but I call them the Babu Fricks. Isn't it funny that Rise of Skywalker, as disliked as it is, gave us one big part of Star Wars lore that is continuing on, and that is the Babu Frick of it all. There's moments where it's just a bunch of those guys and Grogu on screen together, which means it's a bunch of puppets or sometimes CG made to look like puppets. And it can absolutely not work, but guess what? It does work. And yes, you understand these are puppets and you're going to think of Muppets a little, but I also thought a lot about Dark Crystal and Labyrinth and some of the fantasy films that Jim Henson Company did, because it has that vibe as we're watching these characters in this world, in the Star Wars galaxy, interact with each other, interact with the larger world around them. There are some fun creatures throughout the film. One in particular, though, I loved. It is a creature, an aquatic based creature that Mando encounters at one point inside a pit and just looks incredible, has a very distinct look, I think, in Star Wars and was very visually striking. Besides The Mandalorian and Grogu, the movie makes good use of Zeb, once more voiced by Steve Blum, who popped up briefly on Mandalorian Season 3, but has a larger role here, uh, working with Mando as a pilot and sometimes helping him, in fights. And I think they do a good job with Zeb because sometimes when they bring these animated characters into live action, there is the onus of if you don't know that animated history, it feels like you're playing catch up, I think, for a lot of people. But not with Zeb. They never go into his backstory. He's just a likable presence in this movie. And I think that, people will respond to him who are meeting him for the first time. And then there's Rada the Hutt, who goes back to the Clone Wars animated movie, which was a not so great start to what would become a great series. And Jeremy Allen White voicing him is such a random combination. But I like this character a lot. He is a different type of Hutt than we've met before, besides the fact that, yes, he's very swole, he's very buff. But we get to know this guy. He is the son of Jabba, which you might recall if you knew the Clone Wars movie. But here we get to see his perspective. It's different from Jabba, it's different from other Hutts, and I did like this character quite a bit. The movie kind of wastes Sigourney Weaver, and I hate when movies waste Sigourney Weaver. They don't Defenders waste her, though. But, she pops up as a high-ranking part of the New Republic who is giving Mando some assignments. I wish she had a little bit more to do. I wish we got a little bit more nuance with this character. Casting Sigourney Weaver is fun because it's cool to see her in this role in the Star Wars universe, but there's not a lot to that character. The biggest criticism of the movie is its length. It's 2 hours and 12 minutes, and it just feels about 15 minutes longer than it needs to be. It just feels like this movie should not be notably longer than the original Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back, which it is, because the story it's telling is not going to be monumentally important to ongoing saga, ongoing lore here. And because it is, a one-off standalone adventure, it drags a little bit in the third act because it kind of feels like two extended episodes, really. There is a pretty distinct split between one adventure Mando has in the movie and another. They're very connected. What happens in the first affects the second. It's why the second is happening, but it makes it feel like you're getting two expanded episodes here. And it feels like that second episode, which is to say the second half of the movie, it did start to drag a bit. It did feel like this could have been tightened up. And I have to praise a very essential part of this movie, which is Ludwig Göransson, whose score to the TV series has always been great. I mean, look, this guy has won multiple Oscars for a reason, but I think he does exceptional work here, both using the themes that he wrote for the TV show, but also expanding them, coming up with some brand new stuff. There's a whole other section of kind of electronic sounding music that's specific to one planet they go to. Then it brings in that wonderful Mandalorian theme, and every time it does, it really hits home. As with John Williams, he continues that tradition of music being a key component to Star Wars in a very appreciated manner. Look, going into this movie, my big trepidation was the fact that this is a continuation of a TV show. And so for me, as someone who's super hyped about Star Wars movies every time I go see them, no matter what I think of them coming out of them, I've always been super hyped. And who Star Wars is very important to me. Star Wars is important to my life. Star Wars has affected my life, my career. I mean, it's affected my body because I have this tattoo. I didn't go into this movie very hyped. And it felt strange to feel subdued about it, but I know that's because it was a continuation of a TV show, that the trailers weren't really selling me anything new beyond, hey, you like Mandalorian and Grogu? They're back and they're on the big screen this time. And so watching the film, I thought, well, that is what I got. And it's still strange to me that they decided that this would be the first movie in so many years. And I wonder if that's a misstep. That being said, on its own terms, had a very good time with this. It did have that Star Wars feeling that you want to have. It did evoke that. And I know that people like to be absolute with, it's the best thing ever or the worst thing ever. People who saw this movie ahead of me were saying similar things that I did, and I saw people online say, "Well, that means it's actually crap." But it's not crap. It's a good time. That doesn't mean I don't wish it were maybe something more than it is. The previous Star Wars live action movie that it most evokes is easily Solo, which was also pretty much a standalone caper movie and a fun one. But I think that this is a better movie than Solo because Solo actually had some things that I thought were really knocks against it. And that was specifically the fact that it was an Han Solo origin story and that the movie would come to a crashing halt whenever they tried to introduce something from Han Solo's life in a big important way that we didn't necessarily ever need to be presented the way it was and never had questions about in the first place. So I think that this movie is ultimately more successful on that front, even though they kind of stand together as the movies that are just like, hey, you can throw these on and have a good time in the Star Wars universe, but nothing from this is really going to carry over for the most part. I shouldn't say that absolutely because, of course, every little thing could carry over. And this movie does a good job with Easter eggs, which is to say, they're not hitting you over the head. If you're someone like me, and someone like you, I'm guessing, you're going to recognize things. And you go, oh, that's like a character from this, or other characters from animation that pop up here. There are other little references and vehicles and weapons that do harken back to stories from the past, but they never sort of halt the movie. I don't think they ever feel awkward in the way that some of that stuff sometimes can and can sometimes be an obstacle for people who don't follow this stuff religiously. And I think that is admirable because I don't think every Star Wars movie or Star Wars story should do that. I don't think it needs to do that. And so I think that this works on that level very well. So yeah, I had a good time with Mandalorian and Grogu. It is lightweight Star Wars fun. It is sort of a low-key Star Wars. It does not give you that full high of seeing, something truly epic, but it does give you the, easy thrills, the easy fun of being back in this universe with characters you like, having, their next adventure, their next story. And I do wish there was a little more to it than that. But what we do get, I can't say wasn't well made, wasn't fun. I do hope going forward, when Starfighter next year, for instance, is going to be something a little more substantial. Yes, it's strange they made this the first Star Wars movie back in theaters in so long. I do wonder what the next step will be for these characters, but I still would welcome more stories with these characters because I still think that they really do make for a great on-screen duo. So, those are my thoughts for The Mandalorian and Grogu, which is, of course, in theaters everywhere this weekend. If you can like and subscribe, that would be great. Thanks so much. May the Force be with you, and all that good stuff.